Imagine waking up, like on a Tuesday morning, to a rolling energy blackout that it just stops your entire factory floor cold.
Just completely dead in the water.
Right. And then on Wednesday, a sudden spike in foreign exchange rates means the raw materials you literally just imported, they now cost double what you originally budgeted for.
Which wipes out the profit instantly.
Exactly. And by Thursday afternoon, some new, totally unanticipated tax regulation is drafted that threatens to basically bankrupt your whole quarter. Welcome to doing business in Pakistan.
Yeah, it's an incredibly intense environment.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today, we aren't just talking about, surviving that kind of chaos. We're actually talking about weaponizing it. Welcome to the deep dive.
And that intensity is exactly why we are analyzing this specific market today. Because if you take a standard textbook 5-year strategic plan from some stable Western economy...
Like a nicely paved highway.
Right, exactly. If you try to execute that highway strategy in a market with this level of volatility, you aren't just going to fail. You are going to be completely blindsided.
Right.
So today, we are really pulling apart Chapter 2 of Suleman Anwar's text on strategic management. We're looking at understanding the external environment and competitive forces. But we are taking all that theory and battle testing it against the actual realities of the Pakistani market.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we want to give you, the listener, a mental toolkit. Whether you're, prepping for a massive boardroom presentation, or you're launching a startup, or you're just trying to understand how these huge global forces actually impact local markets.
You have to be able to see beyond the daily emergencies.
Yes, you need to spot those hidden patterns of profitability. So to do that, we aren't just going to sit here and list off dry textbook definitions.
No, that would be terrible.
It would be so boring. Instead, we're going to follow 3 completely hypothetical but, highly realistic companies throughout this entire deep dive.
I think that's the absolute best way to dissect this material. Let's establish our test subjects right now.
Lay them out for us.
First, we have Zeta Textiles. Okay, this is a legacy, family-owned export business based in Faisalabad.
Okay, heavy industry.
Right. They employ thousands of people, and their entire survival basically depends on selling garments to these massive global brands in Europe and North America.
So Zeta Textiles is our legacy exporter. Let's make our second company a complete contrast to that.
Good idea. What are you thinking?
Let's call them Payfront. They are a sleek, hyper-aggressive financial technology startup, a fintech operating out of Karachi.
Oh, I like that. High growth.
Exactly. They're building a digital wallet. They're just burning through venture capital cash, and they're trying to capture millions of unbanked young consumers.
Perfect contrast. And for our third subject, let's look at domestic heavy infrastructure. We'll call them Atlas Cement.
Atlas Cement. Sounds heavy.
Very heavy. They operate massive kilns, they are incredibly energy intensive, and their biggest customers are government infrastructure projects and, huge real estate developers.
Okay, so we've got Zeta Textiles, Payfront Fintech, and Atlas Cement. Now, before we can actually arm these companies with a strategy, we have to shatter a massive illusion.
The myth of isolation.
Right. The text calls it the myth of isolation, and it's this incredibly arrogant idea that a lot of leaders secretly harbor.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a belief that if you just, hire the smartest engineers or design the slickest app or buy the absolute fastest looms, your internal brilliance will somehow just overpower the market.
Yeah, it's the belief that your organization operates in a vacuum. And the foundational premise of this source material is that no matter how brilliant your internal operations are,
They don't matter.
well, they matter, but your strategy will live or die based on external forces, period. These external forces dictate your demand, they set your cost structure, they draw your regulatory boundaries.
They literally determine if your technology is going to be obsolete next year.
Exactly. But every CEO on Earth deals with external forces.
Right. I mean, a bakery in London deals with inflation. A software company in Silicon Valley deals with shifting regulations.
So what makes the environment for Zeta, Payfront, and Atlas so uniquely brutal?
Yeah, what's the difference here?
What's fascinating here is the sheer amplification of that turbulence. The text points out specific amplifiers in Pakistan that take your standard, run-of-the-mill business challenges and they turn the dial up to 11.
We're talking about, severe policy discontinuity.
Yes. An administration might incentivize a specific industry heavily on Monday, and then the very next administration might penalize it a year later.
Plus, you have brutal inflation rates, extreme foreign exchange or FX volatility, systemic energy constraints.
And simultaneously, this massive rapid wave of digital adoption sweeping the country.
It's a crazy cocktail.
Yeah.
Extreme constraints and extreme opportunities happening literally at the exact same moment.
Which is why traditional planning fails.
So if I'm the CEO of Zeta Textiles, and my energy costs are wildly unpredictable, and the value of the rupee against the dollar is swinging back and forth every week, how do I actually plan?
Well, what do you think most people do?
I mean, do I just sit in my office and react to whatever the morning newspaper says?
And that is exactly how most companies die in this market.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The strategic implication the text lays out is that environmental scanning cannot be a one-off report.
Right, like that annual retreat thing.
Exactly. In a lot of comfortable corporate cultures, environmental scanning is just something a junior analyst does once a year.
They put it into a glossy slide deck, present it to the board, everyone nods, and then the binder just sits on a shelf gathering dust.
It's totally useless. But in a volatile context like Pakistan, scanning must be a continuous living capability. It has to be the nervous system of the company.
It has to constantly answer two very specific questions, right? So what, and now what?
Yes, those two questions are everything.
I want to linger on that for a second. So what, and now what? It's literally the difference between reading a headline and making a business decision.
Exactly. Give me an example with our companies.
Okay, let's say Payfront Fintech sees a headline that the central bank is suddenly tightening licensing requirements for digital wallets.
Okay, a big regulatory shift.
Right. The so what is, oh, this creates a massive barrier to entry for any new competitors trying to launch tomorrow.
And the now what?
The now what is, we need to immediately reallocate our marketing budget to acquire users even faster right now before a licensed competitor can catch up to our market share.
Precisely. You have to convert external observations into internal decision-relevant implications.
But you can't just do that on gut instinct, can you?
No, absolutely not. You need a structured way to read the terrain without getting paralyzed by the sheer volume of data out there.
Because there's a lot of noise.
So much noise. To filter it, we have to zoom out to the macro level. We have to map the big clouds gathering on the horizon.
Which brings us to the classic PESTEL framework.
Yes, the foundational tool.
For you listening, that stands for political, economic, socio-cultural, technological, environmental, and legal factors.
It covers all the bases.
But I have to push back here.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't PESTEL just a fancy academic way of making a giant, terrifying list of things you absolutely cannot control?
That's a common critique, yeah.
I mean, if I am the CEO of Atlas Cement, I cannot control the federal interest rate. I cannot control global climate change. Why am I paying my executive team to sit in a room and list out things that are entirely out of our hands?
Because the goal of PESTEL is not control.
It's not.
Not at all. The goal is diagnosis and positioning. Look, you can't control the weather.
Obviously not.
But you can definitely choose whether to build your ship out of wood or steel. And you can choose whether to set sail right into a hurricane or wait in the harbor for a clear day.
Oh, I see. So PESTEL forces you to look at the macro environment and identify the waves that are actually going to hit your specific ship.
Exactly. Let's prove that. Let's run our companies through some high salience examples from the text.
Okay, let's start with the political sphere. The text specifically highlights policy unpredictability and the complexities of federal versus provincial coordination.
Take Atlas Cement. They are moving millions of tons of heavy material across the country every single day.
Right. Huge logistical operation.
If there is a sudden shift in how a weight limit regulation is enforced at provincial borders,
Or a sudden political dispute that shuts down a major highway corridor.
their entire supply chain freezes overnight. That is a macro political factor that directly, immediately impacts their bottom line.
Wow, okay. Then you have the economic factors. For Zeta Textiles, I imagine this is life or death.
It really is. Inflation obviously drives up their local labor costs.
But extreme FX volatility is a real killer. Right?
Absolutely. Think about it. If Zeta agrees to sell 1 million shirts to a buyer in London for a set price in British pounds,
But by the time they actually manufacture and ship those shirts 6 months later, the exchange rate has violently shifted against them.
they could lose money on the entire massive order through no fault of their own manufacturing process.
That's terrifying. Then we have socio-cultural, which we are going to dive into very deeply in a few minutes, but that involves demographics and behavioral norms.
And technological is completely the domain of Payfront Fintech.
Right, the rapid adoption of mobile wallets, the penetration of 4G networks in rural areas.
Those are massive tailwinds for them.
And what about environmental? The text calls out climate shocks and severe water stress in Pakistan.
If you are Zeta Textiles and you rely heavily on local cotton crops.
An unprecedented monsoon season that wipes out the harvest is an environmental factor that literally destroys your inbound logistics.
Exactly. And finally, legal. This brings in things like sudden tax regime reforms.
Oh, yeah. If the government suddenly decides to increase this super tax on large corporations, Atlas Cement and Zeta Textiles just see their retained earnings vanish from one quarter to the next.
So we have this massive list of threats.
It's still a giant, terrifying list, though.
It is, but the text introduces this concept of leading indicators, which is how you manage the terror.
I love this concept. If we are driving in an off-road rally, a leading indicator is like looking for the dust cloud a mile ahead before you actually hit the pothole.
That's a great way to visualize it. A leading indicator is a metric that signals early movement before the full impact hits your financial statements.
So instead of waiting for the new tax law to destroy your margins, you track the leading indicators.
Right. What policy drafts are currently being circulated in committee?
If you're a Payfront Fintech, you aren't just looking at your own user growth dashboard, right?
No, you are tracking the national diffusion of smartphones. You're looking at telecom data.
And if you were Atlas Cement, you're tracking the global futures price of coal in international markets.
Because that is your primary energy input. You are looking for the smoke before the fire actually reaches your factory.
But this brings me right back to my fear of the list. If I am the CEO of Zeta Textiles and my team brings me a massive dashboard tracking policy drafts, global cotton yields, UK retail inflation, and local grid stability,
You're overwhelmed.
I am going to drown in data. How does a management team actually prioritize this without getting paralyzed by anxiety?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the text introduces one of the most vital filtering mechanisms, the PESTEL impact matrix.
The impact matrix.
Yes. It argues that not all external issues deserve equal managerial attention. It is a fatal mistake to treat every single threat as a 5-alarm fire.
So what do you do with the giant list?
You take your giant list and you plot it on a matrix with 2 axes, significance and uncertainty.
Okay, let's break that down. Significance meaning the actual impact on your specific business.
Correct.
Like, does this factor just cause a minor headache for HR, or does it fundamentally alter your revenue model, your cost structure, or your existential risk profile?
Exactly. And uncertainty meaning how unpredictable the issue's direction, timing, or magnitude is.
Right. Do we know exactly what is going to happen, or is it a total coin toss?
By plotting your factors on this grid, you generate a very clear, mathematically sound decision rule for your management team.
Walk me through the mechanics of that decision rule. Let's use Zeta Textiles and the FX volatility we just talked about. Where does that sit on the matrix?
For Zeta Textiles, FX volatility has high significance. As we established, it can wipe out their profit margin on a 1,000,000 shirt order overnight.
It doesn't get more significant than that.
Yeah.
And the uncertainty.
It also has high uncertainty. No economist in the world can tell Zeta exactly what the rupee to dollar parity will be in 8 months.
So, high impact, high uncertainty. What is the rule?
The rule is, for high-impact, high-uncertainty items, you cannot lock yourself into a rigid single-path plan.
What do you do instead?
You need scenarios, hedges, and flexible options.
Stop right there. Hedges. Explain that to me like I'm a completely non-financial operator. What does a hedge actually look like in the real world for Zeta Textiles?
Okay, imagine you are betting on a horse race, and you put all your money on a white horse.
Okay, go white horse.
But you are secretly terrified a black horse might win and you'll lose everything.
Right.
So you place a smaller, secondary bet on the black horse.
Oh, I see.
If the white horse wins, you make a big profit, minus the small cost of your secondary bet. If the black horse wins, your secondary bet pays off and covers the loss of your main bet.
You're literally buying insurance against your own plan.
Exactly. For Zeta Textiles, a financial hedge means going to a bank today and buying a forward contract.
How does that work?
They lock in an exchange rate today for the money they will receive in 8 months. It costs them a fee up front, that's the price of the insurance, but it totally removes the uncertainty.
Oh, that's brilliant. So they know exactly how much local currency they will get, allowing them to confidently pay their workers and buy raw materials without waking up in a cold sweat every time the currency market moves.
Exactly. That is how you handle high impact, high uncertainty.
Okay, that makes total sense. If X happens, we trigger plan A. If Y happens, we trigger plan B, or we hedge. But what if a factor is high impact, but low uncertainty?
Need an example.
Like, if Payfront Fintech knows for a fact from demographic data that a massive bulge of 18-year-olds is entering the workforce next year, and they will all need digital wallets.
For high impact, low uncertainty, the decision rule completely flips.
Really?
You do not waste time building scenarios. You don't need a plan B. The wave is coming, you can see it clearly, and you know exactly when it will hit.
So what's the rule?
The rule here is execution readiness. You need your surfboard waxed, and you need to be in the water paddling right now.
So Payfront needs their server capacity upgraded today.
Their marketing campaigns locked and their customer service bots trained right now. No scenarios, just aggressive execution.
This matrix is brilliant because it forces discipline. It stops executives from arguing endlessly over things that don't matter.
And it stops them from trying to rigidly plan for things that are fundamentally unknowable, like the FX rate.
The text suggests clustering these high-priority factors into, 3 to 5 broad strategic themes, right?
Yes. So instead of dealing with 50 disparate data points, the Atlas Cement leadership team is focused on broad themes like energy security or regulatory compliance.
And you tackle those themes at 3 different levels, right?
Correct. Strategically, like, do we need to partner with a renewable energy firm? Operationally, do we need to tighten our working capital controls?
And governance. Do we have the right contingency triggers in place at the board level?
It takes the chaos of the outside world and translates it into a very structured to-do list for the inside of the company.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. We have spent all this time looking up at the sky.
At the macro clouds.
Right, we've mapped the economic clouds, the political storms, the technological waves. But what about the actual ground we are standing on?
You mean the people?
Exactly. What about the human beings inside the factory? Because you can have the most analytically brilliant, matrix-tested strategy in the world, but if it ignores the psychology of the people executing it,
It is going to crash and burn.
100%.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the hidden layer of strategy.
The socio-cultural environment, specifically what the text calls the National Cultural Audit.
The text makes a very forceful argument here that national culture dictates what actually works inside an organization.
It shapes everything. It shapes leadership styles, communication, negotiation, control systems, and what people perceive as fair incentives.
I love thinking of national culture as an operating system, like an OS on a computer or a smartphone.
Okay, let's run with that analogy.
So your brilliant new business strategy is a software app you just designed. You can have the most beautifully coded, mathematically perfect software app ever built.
Wait.
But if you try to install a Mac app on a Windows OS, the app doesn't just run poorly, it crashes. It fundamentally will not execute.
That is a perfect framework for understanding this. A misfit between strategy and the cultural OS guarantees execution failure, regardless of how strong the financial model is.
So what does the Pakistani OS look like?
The text outlines several key organizational behaviors that are deeply embedded in this cultural OS. We are looking at an environment heavily dominated by family ownership structures.
That's just huge.
High context communication, a profound respect for hierarchy, and deeply entrenched informal networks.
Let's run our companies through this cultural audit. The text gives us specific dimensions to analyze. First is power distance and hierarchy.
This is critical. This touches on decision speed, how much a leader delegates, and the level of psychological safety a junior employee feels.
So in a culture with high power distance, what does that look like?
There is a very strong, often rigid deference to authority. Power is concentrated at the top and decisions flow downward. Think about Zeta Textiles, a family-owned legacy firm.
The patriarch, the founder, is likely treated with immense reverence, which honestly can be a massive strength. I mean, if a crisis hits, the patriarch can make a unilateral decision, and the entire factory pivots instantly without endless agonizing committee debates.
Yes, high power distance enables rapid execution if the leader is visionary, but it creates a massive vulnerability. It heavily stifles upward feedback.
Give me a scenario.
Let's say a junior quality control inspector on the floor at Zeta Textiles realizes that a brand new dyeing process, one the patriarch personally approved, is actually weakening the fabric.
Okay, major problem. In a low power distance culture like a Silicon Valley startup, that junior employee might just slack the CEO directly and say, hey, your new process is broken.
Without a second thought. But at Zeta Textiles,
What happens?
telling the patriarch that his new expensive initiative is failing is a massive breach of protocol. It causes the leader a public loss of face.
Oh, wow. So what does the employee do?
The junior employee stays quiet. They don't say a word. The defective shirts are manufactured, they are shipped, the global buyer rejects the massive order, and the company loses millions.
The software crashed because it didn't account for the OS.
Exactly.
So how does a manager adapt the software? I mean, if Zeta Textiles absolutely needs to catch defects, but they have to respect the high-power distance, what is the actionable strategy there?
You don't try to change the national culture.
You can't.
Right. You engineer around it. You build structured intermediaries.
What does that mean?
Instead of a generic open door policy, which nobody will use, you create a formal, highly respected audit committee. You frame the act of finding defects not as a criticism of the leader, but as an act of fierce loyalty to the family business.
That shifts the psychology.
You institutionalize the feedback so it doesn't require a junior employee to commit an act of social rebellion.
That is fascinating. The text also highlights collectivism and relationship orientation.
Yes, this is about loyalty, trust, and how you interact with suppliers and customers. It's much less about purely transactional, cold-blooded contracts, and much more about long-term relational bonds.
Let's bring Payfront Fintech into this. They are trying to convince people to take their hard-earned cash out from under their mattresses and put it into a digital app on their phone.
A huge leap of faith.
If they just run an ad campaign based purely on transactional logic like, we offer 2% lower transfer fees than the traditional bank, it might totally fail.
It probably will fail because in a highly collectivist, relationship-oriented culture, trust isn't built by a spreadsheet. Trust is built by social proof.
So how do they market it? Do they just change the ads?
They need to adapt deeply to local values. They don't sell Western individual financial freedom. They sell the ability to securely send money instantly to your parents in the village.
Oh, that's smart.
They partner with trusted community figures to vouch for the app. The marketing campaign has to speak the language of the cultural OS.
We also have uncertainty avoidance. This dictates a culture's risk appetite and their tolerance for disruptive innovation.
If you are operating in a culture with high uncertainty avoidance, people naturally crave stability, clear rules, and predictability.
Okay, let's use Atlas Cement. If Atlas wants to implement a radical new automated logistics software that completely changes how truck drivers get their load assignments,
They will face massive resistance. The drivers will fear for their livelihoods. The middle managers will fear losing control of their fiefdoms.
which brings us directly to change management. This seems like the ultimate test of cultural compatibility.
It is.
If Atlas Cement absolutely has to force this software update through to survive in the market, how do they do it without triggering a massive strike?
The text strongly advises against top-down mandates in this specific scenario. You have to use credible internal champions.
Like who?
You find the most respected veteran truck driver and the most influential floor manager, and you bring them into the pilot program early. You make them the face of the change.
So you co-opt the informal network.
Exactly. You sequence the rollout slowly, and crucially, you protect people's dignity.
How do you do that?
You frame the new software not as replacing outdated workers, but as empowering our loyal workforce with modern tools. You appeal to the collectivist mindset. You tell them this protects the whole Atlas Cement family.
That is such a subtle but powerful shift. The text also calls out religion and ethics as a core dimension, right?
Yes, which profoundly shapes product design, HR policies, and corporate legitimacy.
And gender norms and inclusion, which
Yeah.
impacts labor participation and how you even design the physical workplace.
For Payfront, designing an app interface that feels secure, private, and accessible to female entrepreneurs running home-based businesses requires deeply understanding those specific cultural nuances.
Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize where we are. We are operating in an incredibly turbulent market. We've used PESTEL to scan the macro horizon and filter the noise through our impact matrix.
We've audited our cultural operating systems so our internal software doesn't crash.
Right. Now, we have to look at the actual physical reality of doing business. How does a company literally create a product, move it, and sell it within this specific context?
This brings us to value chains and value webs.
Yes.
This is where strategy moves from high-level theory to physical operations. A value chain is a step-by-step map of every specific activity that creates customer value, from sourcing raw inputs all the way down to after-sales service.
Crucially, every step in this chain incurs a cost.
Yes. The fundamental goal is to ensure the final value you deliver is greater than the cumulative costs you incurred along the way. That's your margin.
The text provides a standard template for this. You identify your primary activities, inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and customer service.
And then you map your support activities, the things keeping the lights on, like procurement, tech development, HR, and infrastructure.
But mapping it out on a whiteboard is just the baseline. The real masterclass here is identifying the Pakistan-specific bottlenecks and value leakages.
Exactly. You map the chain of Zeta Textiles, and then you ask the brutal question, where are we bleeding value?
And the text lists some severe systemic leakages common in this market.
Like energy outages that stop production mid-cycle, transport inefficiencies that delay shipments for days,
Informal taxation or extortion along supply routes.
extreme quality variability in locally sourced raw materials.
So what does this all mean for our companies? Let's say Zeta Textiles maps their value chain. They discover that because of terrible road infrastructure and informal taxation checkpoints between their factory in Faisalabad and the port in Karachi,
They are bleeding, say, 15% of their total value just in outbound logistics.
their profit is literally evaporating on the highway. What do? They can't magically pave a new national highway.
No, they can't.
They can't single-handedly reform the local tax collection agencies.
This is a critical realization, and it's exactly why the text immediately pivots from the traditional value chain to the concept of the value web.
A value web.
Yes.
Yeah.
A value chain is linear and internal. It assumes you basically control the whole process. A value web expands your view beyond the four walls of your factory.
It looks at the entire interconnected ecosystem.
Exactly. Your suppliers, your distributors, digital platforms, regulators, ecosystem complementers, and even local communities.
So if Zeta Textiles is stuck on the broken highway, they need to stop looking at their own trucks and start looking at the web.
Precisely. Competitive advantage in a turbulent market often sits in ecosystem coordination, not just in making your own internal processes 1% more efficient.
Zeta Textiles needs to ask, which dependencies are creating massive risk, and which complementarities can we leverage to bypass this local roadblock?
That is the key question.
Give me an example of leveraging a complementarity. How does Zeta actually bypass the broken highway?
They look at the value web and realize they don't have to be a logistics company. They find a digital freight matching platform, a tech startup.
Okay, like an Uber for freight.
Exactly. A startup that optimizes trucking routes, consolidates loads, and uses GPS tracking to ensure absolute accountability and avoid those informal checkpoints.
So Zeta integrates this platform into their operations.
They use a digital layer to smooth out the physical potholes. They plugged the leak not by buying better trucks, but by partnering within the ecosystem.
Let's apply this value web idea to Payfront Fintech. They're trying to acquire customers rapidly, but a massive value leakage for them is the physical cash-in, cash-out process.
Right, because people have paper money, and they need a way to physically digitize it to get it into the app.
Payfront can't afford to build 1,000 physical bank branches to take everyone's cash.
No startup can. So they look at the value web. Who already has physical reach in every single neighborhood in Pakistan?
The local corner stores, the Kirana stores.
Exactly. Payfront creates a complementarity. They partner with these thousands of small retail stores, turning them into micro-agents.
The store owner gets a small commission for digitizing the cash, and Payfront gets a massive nationwide physical infrastructure without laying a single brick.
They coordinated the ecosystem to completely bypass their biggest constraint.
That is the power of the value web. You find where the friction is highest, and you apply ecosystem partnerships to route around it.
It's a beautiful strategy.
But even if you perfectly map your macro threats, align your cultural OS, and optimize your value web,
Yeah.
you are still in a street fight.
Oh, absolutely. The market is unforgiving.
You are competing against other companies who want your customers and your profits. We have to measure the blood pressure of the industry itself. How brutal is the competition?
This brings us to Porter's 5 forces.
A classic.
It is an absolute cornerstone of strategic management. But applying it to the structural realities of Pakistan reveals completely different dynamics than you'd see in a Western textbook.
The 5 forces framework basically argues that your profitability is not just determined by your direct competitors.
Right. It is determined by 5 distinct pressures: the threat of new entrants, the bargaining power of suppliers, the bargaining power of buyers, the threat of substitutes, and the rivalry among existing competitors.
Let's use an analogy here to make this really visceral for the listener. I want you to picture your company's profitability as water in a bucket.
Okay, I like this.
Your goal is to keep the bucket full. But Porter's 5 forces represent different ways that bucket constantly gets drained.
Walk us through the bucket.
So Rivalry among existing competitors is someone trying to physically knock the bucket out of your hands.
They want to steal your water.
Exactly. Bargaining power of suppliers are the people selling you the bucket. They keep drilling holes in the bottom, charging you more for raw materials and draining your profit.
That makes sense.
Bargaining power buyers are your customers. They are scooping water out of the top, constantly demanding lower prices and better quality.
Squeezing your margins.
Threat of new entrants is someone showing up with an empty bucket trying to siphon off your water. And the threat of substitutes is someone convincing your customers that they don't even need water. They should be drinking soda instead.
That is a highly accurate, mechanistic way to view it. And just like we did with PESTEL, the text uses an impact matrix here.
You rate each of these 5 pressures on a scale of 1 to 5 to compute the overall attractiveness, or basically the structural brutality of the industry.
A higher score means stronger pressure, which means more holes in your bucket and lower average profitability for everyone in that industry.
Let's make this concrete. Let's run our 3 companies through the 5 forces to see where their buckets are leaking the fastest. Let's start with Atlas Cement. What does their industry structure look like?
For Atlas Cement, the supplier power is massive.
Holes in the bottom.
Huge holes. Making cement requires massive kilns running at extreme temperatures. They are entirely dependent on suppliers of coal and grid electricity.
If the global price of coal spikes, or the local grid raises tariffs, the suppliers drill a massive hole in the bottom of Atlas's bucket.
And they cannot easily switch to a different energy source overnight. They are locked in.
What about their buyers? Are they scooping water out of the top?
Buyer power is also intensely concentrated. While they do sell to individual home builders, their massive needle-moving contracts are with the government for huge infrastructure projects like dams or highways.
And if the government is buying 40% of your output, they dictate the price.
They are scooping massive amounts of water out of the top, and rivalry is highly sensitive to these demand cycles. When government contracts dry up, Atlas and its competitors engage in brutal price wars to unload their excess capacity.
Okay, let's pivot to Payfront Fintech. They are in the digital banking space. What drains their bucket?
For Payfront, the threat of new entrants is heavily shaped by regulation. In a truly free market, anyone could build a financial app in their garage.
But in banking, the central bank dictates who gets a license.
Exactly. This regulatory moat actually protects Payfront. It stops 1,000 other startups from showing up with empty buckets.
However, their rivalry is intensely escalating via digital channels, right?
It's a massive, expensive race for user acquisition, burning cash on promos.
And what about substitutes?
This is their biggest existential threat. The threat of substitutes is very real. Their biggest competitor isn't just another fintech app, it's physical cash.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If the app glitches or if users lose trust for even a second, they instantly substitute back to paper money under the mattress.
Finally, let's look at Zeta Textiles. As an export manufacturer, their bucket must look like an absolute sieve.
It is arguably the most structurally challenging of the 3. Buyer power is incredibly high. They are dealing with massive global fast fashion brands in Europe.
So if Zeta tries to raise prices by like 5 cents a shirt to cover their local inflation costs,
The global brand will simply shift their entire order to a factory in Vietnam or Bangladesh. The buyer has absolute leverage.
and their suppliers,
Supplier power is equally crushing. Zeta is squeezed by local energy providers, chemical suppliers for their dyes, and the cost of imported machinery, which, as we discussed, is vulnerable to that FX volatility.
Furthermore, the text points out that legal and environmental requirements, specifically global ESG, or environmental, social, and governance compliance, are becoming a massive force.
Global buyers are now demanding zero-carbon supply chains. If Zeta can't prove their factory is green, the buyer just walks away.
So if I am the CEO of Zeta Textiles, I am looking at this bucket and water is just pouring out of every conceivable hole. Global buyers are crushing my prices, energy suppliers are crushing my costs, and European regulators are demanding expensive green upgrades. How do you survive that?
This is the most crucial insight in the entire chapter. The text explicitly states that the goal of strategy is not just to survive the 5 forces.
Yeah, it's not.
The goal is to actively shape them.
Shape them.
You don't just bail water faster, you fundamentally patch the holes in the bucket. You change the structure of the industry to your advantage.
Okay, I need you to explain exactly how a textile company in Pakistan shapes global macroeconomic forces. How does Zeta Textiles actually patch the holes?
You use strategic levers. Let's attack supplier power first. The grid electricity is too expensive and unreliable. Right.
Right.
So Zeta uses a strategy called backward integration.
Stop right there. Backward integration. Explain that to me like I'm a 5-year-old running a lemonade stand. What does that actually mean?
Okay, imagine you run a lemonade stand. You buy your lemons from a farmer down the street. But every summer, when it gets really hot and you need lemons the most, the farmer doubles his price.
Because he knows I need them. He has massive supplier power.
Exactly. Backward integration is when you take your profits, you go buy a plot of land, and you plant your own lemon trees. You
Yeah.
integrate backwards into your own supply chain. You don't need the farmer anymore.
So for Zeta Textiles, planting lemon trees means
It means building their own 50-megawatt solar power park right next to their factory.
wow.
They take the capital hit upfront to build the solar infrastructure. Now, they generate their own power. They cut the grid supplier out of the equation entirely.
They permanently patched that hole in the bottom of the bucket.
Yeah. And as a secondary benefit, they can now prove to the European buyers that their supply chain is running on green, renewable energy, instantly satisfying that ESG compliance pressure.
That is brilliant. Okay, what about buyer power? How do they stop the European brands from constantly demanding lower prices?
You invest in extreme differentiation. If you just sell plain white t-shirts, you are a commodity, and the buyer has all the power.
Anyone can make a white t-shirt.
But what if Zeta invests heavily in advanced R&D and develops a proprietary sustainable fabric weave that is incredibly durable and uses 90% locked water to dye? And they patent it.
Oh, that completely flips the script.
Now, if the European brand wants to market a new ultra-sustainable clothing line, they have to buy from Zeta. They can't just go to Bangladesh because Bangladesh doesn't have the patented fabric.
Zeta has shaped the force. They have reduced buyer power by becoming indispensable.
Exactly.
That is incredibly empowering. It shifts you from being a victim of the market to an architect of your own competitive position.
But as an architect, you have to know what phase of construction you are in.
What do you mean?
A strategy of intense R&D and building massive solar parks might be brilliant at one moment, but completely suicidal at another. Industries are not static.
Right.
They are living, breathing organisms that age, mature, and eventually decline. Which brings us to the industry life cycle.
Timing is everything in strategy. A brilliant maneuver executed 3 years too late is a failure.
The industry life cycle, or ILC, breaks down the evolution of an industry into 4 distinct chronological stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline or renewal.
And your strategic priorities, where you literally spend your money and focus your energy, must change radically depending on which stage your industry is currently occupying.
Let's walk through these stages. First is the introduction stage.
In the introduction stage, the industry is essentially newborn. The technology is unproven, the customer doesn't really understand the product yet, and honestly, nobody is making any real money.
Your entire strategic focus here is simply educating the market. You are securing early adopters, building basic credibility, and frantically managing your cash burn while experimenting with the business model to see what actually sticks.
Then, if you survive that phase, you enter the growth stage. The fire catches.
This is the gold rush. Demand just explodes. But this is also the most dangerous phase, because success attracts predators.
So your priorities shift completely.
You are no longer educating the market. You are fighting a brutal war for territory. You have to scale your production capacity rapidly, expand your distribution networks to reach every corner of the country, and invest heavily in brand building to defend against the flood of new entrants who want a piece of the action.
Eventually, though, the gold rush ends. Everyone who wants the product has it. You hit maturity.
In maturity, the explosive top-line growth slows down to a crawl. The strategic priority shifts from expansion to brutal, grinding efficiency.
It becomes a game of cost leadership.
You are trying to squeeze fractional margin improvements out of every single process. You enforce strict capacity discipline, meaning you don't build new factories, you just run the existing ones perfectly. You try to maintain your market share through brand loyalty and hyper-segmentation.
And finally, the fourth stage. Decline or renewal.
This happens when demand fundamentally shrinks, usually due to a new technological paradigm or a massive shift in consumer habits. The strategic choices here are very stark.
You can harvest the business, right?
Yeah.
Cutting all investment and just milking it for whatever cash flow remains.
Or you can consolidate by buying up all your dying competitors to be last one standing. Or ideally, you innovate. You pivot your assets into adjacent markets to spark renewal phase.
The text gives us some really sharp cues for diagnosing which stage an industry is currently in, specifically looking at the Pakistani landscape.
You look for the diffusion of technology, the intensity of price competition, the saturation of physical distribution networks, regulatory tightening, and overarching profitability trends.
Let's do a thought experiment and place our three companies on this timeline. Where does Payfront Fintech sit right now?
Payfront is squarely in the growth stage. If we look at the cues, there is massive cash burn happening to acquire customers, intense promotional competition, rapid expansion of distribution agent networks, and an increasing society-wide diffusion of digital wallet technology.
The players in this space are fighting a land grab war for scale before the market saturates.
Exactly.
What about Atlas Cement?
Heavy infrastructure materials like cement are in deep maturity. They have extremely high market penetration, established legacy brands, and their entire strategic focus is on operational efficiency, shaving pennies off the cost of coal and logistics to maintain margins against volatile demand cycles.
They aren't trying to invent a new concept of cement. They're just trying to produce it cheaper than the guy next door.
Right.
And Zeta Textiles.
The global textile export market is mature, but it is currently facing a forced renewal phase driven by those exact ESG compliance demands and automation we talked about. They're having to completely reinvent their production processes just to stay in the game.
So once you diagnose your stage, what is the actionable mechanism? How do you use that to actually win?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the text introduces the competitive profile matrix, or CPM. Diagnosing your ILC stage tells you what game you are playing. The CPM tells you how good you actually are at playing it compared to your specific rivals.
You build a matrix benchmarking your firm against your top 2 or 3 competitors, scoring yourselves on the critical success factors for that specific stage.
Explain how those critical success factors change. If Payfront is in the growth stage, what are they benchmarking?
Well, in the growth stage, the goal is scaling. So, Payfront CPM shouldn't focus on benchmarking back-office cost-cutting abilities. They should be benchmarking their user acquisition cost, the speed of their app interface, and their ability to attract top-tier software engineering talent against their rival.
Exactly. But if Atlas Cement is in maturity, their CPM looks completely different.
For Atlas Cement, benchmarking app interfaces is totally useless. Their CPM must benchmark their logistics cost per ton, their energy efficiency ratios, and their lobbying access for government contracts.
The ILC tells you what metrics matter. The CPM tells you if you are winning or losing on those metrics. You use it to locate your strategic gaps and direct your investments to close them.
Okay, I want to take a massive step back here.
Yeah.
Look at the journey we have been on. We have generated an overwhelming, almost paralyzing amount of data.
We really have.
We've scanned the macro environment with PESTEL and filtered it through the impact matrix.
Yeah.
We mapped the cultural OS to ensure our software doesn't crash. We traced the value web to find the physical leakages. We calculated the structural blood pressure with the 5 forces. And we timed our strategic moves using the industry lifecycle and the CPM.
It's a lot.
If I'm the CEO of any of these companies, my desk is currently covered in 400 pages of matrices, charts, and threat assessments. If I hand this stack of paper to my executive board, they're going to throw it out the window.
They absolutely will.
How do we synthesize this? How do we distill all of this incredible complexity into a single, mathematically grounded dashboard so a leader can actually make a decision before the market opens on Monday?
This brings us to our final framework, the EFE matrix.
Ah, the grand synthesis.
The EFE, or External Factor Evaluation Matrix, is the mechanism that translates all of that disparate scanning into structured, prioritized decision-making. It mathematically highlights exactly which external issues require the strongest strategic response and forces the organization to face its own vulnerabilities.
Let's walk through the mechanics of how this math actually works without just reading a textbook table. It's essentially a reality check, right?
Yes. You distill all your research down to a list of the 10 to 20 most critical external opportunities and threats. Not 50 things, just the absolute most high-leverage factors. You list them out.
Let's use Zeta Textiles again. One of their threats is European buyers demanding zero-carbon ESG compliance.
Perfect. Next, you assign a weight to that factor. The weight is a number from 0.0 to 1.0, representing how important that specific factor is to the survival of the entire industry.
So 0 means it's irrelevant. A 1.0 means it is the single most defining dynamic in the market.
Crucially, the total weights of all 10 to 20 factors on your list must add up to exactly 1.0. This forces you to prioritize. If you make ESG compliance a 0.20, You have to reduce the weight of something else.
Okay, so Zeta gives the ESG threat a hefty weight of 0.20, because if they don't comply, they lose their entire European market. What next?
Next comes the rating. This is where the brutal honesty is required. On a scale of 1 to 4, you evaluate your specific firm's current response to that external factor.
A1 means your response is poor, a 2 is average, a 3 is above average, and a 4 means your response is superior. You are basically turning that threat into an advantage.
Right. So Zeta gave the ESG threat a massive weight of 0.20. But the CEO looks at the factory floor and realizes they are entirely dependent on high-polluting grid power, they have no recycling protocols, and they have 0 green certifications.
Ouch. So they have to give themselves a rating of 1.
Exactly. Then the math happens. You multiply the weight, which is 0.20, by the rating, which is 1, to get your weighted score for that factor, which is 0.20.
And if they'd already built that 50-megawatt solar park we talked about earlier, their rating would be a 4, and their weighted score would jump to 0.88.
Precisely. You do this for all factors, sum up the weighted scores, and you get a single number that tells you how well your current strategy is navigating the external environment. A total score below 2.5 means you are losing the battle.
The power of the EFE matrix is that it visualizes your vulnerabilities in stark, undeniable mathematics. It stops executives from hiding behind vague optimism.
If a massive threat has a rating of 1, the board demands an immediate strategic response to fix it.
The text highlights some common traps to avoid when building this matrix. The biggest one is confusing internal strengths with external opportunities.
That happens constantly. A CEO will list having a highly skilled IT team as an external opportunity. It is not. That is an internal strength. The external opportunity is the rapid nationwide adoption of digital wallets. Your IT team is simply the tool you use to exploit that opportunity.
Another huge mistake is assigning ratings based on gut feelings rather than hard evidence, or creating a matrix that isn't linked to actual resource allocation.
If an item is on the board as a high-weighted threat with a poor rating, there must be a budget line item attached to fixing it.
This raises a really important, deeply uncomfortable question, though.
What's that?
How can leaders remain truly objective when filling out this matrix, especially in a market like Pakistan? Because the text makes a very pointed, almost subversive observation at the end of this chapter.
I know what you're referring to.
It says that industry structure and profitability in Pakistan are significantly shaped by structural realities, like informal competition, tax differentials, and institutional enforcement variability.
That is the massive elephant in the room for any documented business operating in an emerging market. It requires a level of brutal strategic honesty that many management teams shy away from. You cannot pretend that the market operates purely on pristine textbook economics.
Let's be real about this. Let's look at Payfront Fintech or Atlas Cement. If you are a fully documented, fully compliant tax-paying corporation, and you are competing against an informal sector that pays 0 income tax, ignores labor laws, and bypasses safety regulations.
That is not a minor annoyance. That is a structural reality. That is a massive external threat that absolutely belongs on your EFE matrix.
Because profitability is not just about effort. It's not just about your marketing team working harder or your engineers coding faster in the informal sector. Profitability is dictated by these structural conditions.
If a tax differential means your undocumented competitor has an automatic 20% margin advantage before the product even hits the shelf, no amount of clever social media marketing will overcome that mathematics.
So how do you actually score that on an EFE matrix? If Atlas Cement is losing market share to informal, unregulated mini-kilns, what is their strategic response?
You have to design a strategy that acknowledges and mitigates those specific harsh realities. If you rate your response to informal sector margin advantage as a 1, what are your options? You can't just lower your prices and go bankrupt.
Right, you can't compete on price with someone who doesn't pay taxes.
Maybe your strategic response is to pivot entirely away from the retail market where price is the only factor and focus exclusively on massive government contracts that legally require documented ISO-certified cement suppliers. The informal guys can't bid on those contracts.
You change the battlefield to one where documentation is an asset, not a liability.
Exactly. Or for Zeta Textiles, you pivot entirely to export markets where ESG compliance is rewarded with premium pricing, leaving the cutthroat, price-sensitive local market to the informal competitors.
You cannot ignore the elephant.
Yeah.
The EFE matrix forces you to put those uncomfortable, unfair realities on paper and objectively rate your response to them.
It's the ultimate reality check.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have essentially taken the engine apart, examined every single gear, and rebuilt it while driving at 80 miles an hour in an off-road rally.
It's been a ride.
Let's synthesize the journey we've just been on. We shattered the myth of isolation. We learned that surviving a turbulent, highly amplified market like Pakistan means you cannot just look inward. You need continuous macro scanning using PESTEL, but you have to filter that terrifying noise through an impact matrix so you know exactly when to build a flexible scenario and when to execute with ruthless speed.
We learned that you must audit and deeply respect the cultural operating system, navigating power distance, preserving dignity, and leveraging collectivist trust. Or your brilliant analytical strategy will crash upon implementation.
We expanded our view from linear value chains to interconnected value webs, finding where the ecosystem bleeds value and partnering to bypass those physical roadblocks.
We used Porter's 5 forces not just to measure the pressure of the industry, but to actively find levers like backward integration or extreme differentiation to fundamentally patch the holes in our profit bucket.
We learned how to time our strategic investments based on the industry life cycle, benchmarking our actual capabilities against rivals using the CPM. And finally, we synthesized all this overwhelming complexity into the brutal mathematical honesty of the EFE dashboard.
The underlying philosophy here is that strategy in a volatile market is not about predicting the future with certainty. It is about building an organizational nervous system that perceives threats earlier, processes them more rationally, and adapts to them faster than the competition.
And the most important takeaway for you, listening right now, is that these are not just theoretical concepts for billionaires in corporate boardrooms. Whether you are bootstrapping a tiny digital wallet company from your apartment in Karachi, managing logistics for a massive cement plant in Punjab, or trying to navigate a family textile business through generational change in Faisalabad, this is your survival toolkit. This is how you read the terrain.
I want to leave you with the final puzzle to mull over, a thought experiment to test your new toolkit before you go back to work.
Ooh, let's hear it.
If you were to launch a new documented business in Pakistan tomorrow, knowing all the structural friction, the macroeconomic turbulence, and the specific cultural nuances we just unpacked, which of Porter's 5 forces would you actively choose to ignore to gain an immediate contrarian competitive edge, and which one would you base your entire long-term survival strategy around?
Wow, that is the ultimate strategic question. Would you completely ignore the rivalry and focus entirely on building an ecosystem of substitutes? Would you build a strategy entirely around neutralizing supplier power through massive vertical integration?
Think about it. Look at your own bucket. Look at where the water is leaking.
The turbulence of the market isn't going to stop, but at least now you have the tools to navigate the storm. Keep digging deep, and we'll see you on the next deep dive. Imagine waking up, like on a Tuesday morning, to a rolling energy blackout that just stops your entire factory floor cold.
Just completely dead in the water.
Right. And then on Wednesday, a sudden spike in foreign exchange rates means the raw materials you literally just imported, they now cost double what you originally budgeted for.
Which wipes out the profit instantly.
Exactly. And by Thursday afternoon, some new, totally unanticipated tax regulation is drafted that threatens to basically bankrupt your whole quarter. Welcome to doing business